Well, Jeannie and Alberto set us up really nicely. As they said, with Knight Foundation support, MAS has been exploring this notion of civic assets. Think about them as, again, parks, libraries, recreation centers, public spaces. All of these places that, again, have traditionally served to give us democratic access as equal citizens, and now are under some threat. I think you could say they all have latent potential that's not currently being realized. And thinking about what it might look like if we could, A, realize that latent potential, and what might it look like if these assets in some way were combined or connected to one another into what we're thinking of as a civic commons. Today we have 3 New York leaders who are thinking deeply about these assets. They're operating these assets in some cases, and how they might be reimagined. With us are Regina Myer, president of Brooklyn Bridge Park, Jonathan Bowles, who's the executive director of the Center for an Urban Future, and Tim Tompkins, president of Times Square Alliance. And Regina, I want to begin with you. You are reimagining park space in New York with Brooklyn Bridge Park, and of course the new addition you have there. What are you learning that you think can influence, ought to influence other park directors?
I think that what we've learned building Brooklyn Bridge Park, which is, so many of you know, is a good stretch of the East River waterfront on the Brooklyn side, is that it really takes a great nexus of design and programming to develop a rich, great place on the waterfront. And I want to show you a few slides. This is our entrance at Old Fulton Street, which was really the entrance to a port terminal for most of this century and the century before, and how to create a great space when you don't have the geometry of Grand Army Plaza in either Brooklyn or Manhattan, but you have simply a road end right at the waterfront. You really need a lot of great ingenuity in terms of design. At this entrance here, we have as wide a walkway as we could have gotten, and then the walk to the waterfront, the combination of the ferry activity, the combination of the walk to the larger lawns. That took a lot of design ingenuity. But the other side of that is the programmatic challenges and opportunities at the waterfront. And what we've done by opening up Pier 2 this summer was show that the active recreation sort of rocked what people think of what can happen down at the waterfront. And having the ability to have 5 acres to have court sports and roller skating and events that can activate and also honestly attract such a diverse audience, all different ages, and has been so fantastic. Just to give you a sense. The other thing is, of course, programming. Who do you partner with? What do you really add to the different layers of a great park design to make it fun? You could see here this summer, barbecuing, snow sliding, that was last winter, of course, lots of athletic events, and then programming with partners. And I think the real opportunity that we've used at the park is inviting partners to really not only come and do their event at the park, but then come and grow with the Brooklyn Bridge Park. So you could see our great film series, Smorgasburg, which has become sort of one of the headlines of Brooklyn over the past few years. And then also just great small theater readings in just specific different places. I think all of those layers have added to the placemaking at the park.
You talk about the need for great design, great programming. That's something your peers and other leaders of civic assets should learn. But what have you learned about financing that?
Financing is hard, and it's expensive, and you want to really have a real agreement with the public that when you deliver, you can deliver forever. We have a specific case where we have a financial model where we're self-financed, so we work on that really carefully and make sure that the public knows that the self-financing mechanism, which includes commercial and residential development, will never undermine the public and democratic aspects of the park. We also take advantage of partners who come with their own program and are very careful to make sure that we're not stepping on each other's toes and that we're really letting everybody grow when we know that costs money. So it's a balance.
Yeah. Jonathan, you just took a comprehensive look at the branch libraries in New York. And speaking of financing, I think figured out that it would take a $1.2 billion, is that right?
That's right.
To make those, just to fix what's broken. Doesn't sound like a really compelling or promising political campaign. So what do you do?
Well, I think, one, we need to really rethink libraries, because right now, look at the major challenges facing this city. We've got a real skills gap, an alarming skills gap. Too few New Yorkers have the skills to compete for decent paying jobs today. We hear the mayor talking a lot about this. We've got 37% of our population that are foreign born, and a big chunk of those folks don't speak English very well. We've got an aging population. Over the next 30 years, the 65 and over population is going to grow by 40%. It's already been growing. We have all sorts of other issues. We've got a high youth unemployment rate. We've got a digital divide. Too many people don't have computers or a broadband connection at their homes. And I say all that because libraries are uniquely positioned to address so many of these big challenges that New York City faces. And in fact, libraries are already doing that. If you look at the kind of one slide that I have here, you see these dots, and it's just pretty incredible. New York has 207 branch libraries around the city, and unlike any other institution in New York, libraries really blanket the city, every corner of the city. And so when it comes to providing the services that New Yorkers need, access to ESOL, high school equivalency prep, Facebook for seniors. Libraries are providing all of these services that really are important today. And the problem is, and getting to your question, is I think that too many people think of libraries still as a repository for books, or maybe as a fun place for children's storytelling. And those are still true, but libraries are so much more, and again, they're well placed to solve these challenges. I think what we also need to get to is that, look, the branch libraries in New York average 61 years old. Significant capital needs. Because they're so old, they haven't had the kind of renovations and upgrades that are needed. Instead of really working on modernizing libraries, making them more relevant for how people are using libraries in the 21st century, the library systems in New York have really had to focus on plugging leaky roofs, fixing broken air conditioning systems, and as you mentioned, just those kind of state of good repair needs add up to about $1.1 billion. We have a really broken system for financing the library's capital needs. We need to be really really harnessing our libraries, seeing them as this pivotal role in communities. I think libraries themselves also need to be thinking more about how to partner with community-based organizations. Libraries are doing so many amazing things with their community rooms. In many cases, those community rooms are too small. Many of the branches are too small. 41 of the libraries in Queens are under 10,000 square feet. And so while there's increasing numbers of Queens residents and New Yorkers overall that want to go to these libraries for programs, workshops, they're too small, and libraries are having to make real sacrifices. Do they, have quiet spaces? Do they have programs? And with such small branches, there's a limited ability to do that. I think that there's a lot that could be done with libraries, but I think we need to improve the capital funding process. We need to get the libraries out in communities more and really see them as the community empowerment institutions that they already are.
Mm-hmm. I understand. I mean, obviously, the capital play, it may be difficult, but difficult to do. But we know what that looks like. I think, in terms of programming, it seems to me that, for instance, libraries may be called upon. Maybe a great idea to have after-school education in libraries, right? A lot of libraries provide that function. But every time I talk to someone who heads a library, it's like they're not really being paid to do that, right? I mean, that's not the expectation. They do it because they see a need and they try to sort of, by hook or crook, fix the need, right? But how do you think when you were talking about re-envisioning New York's branch libraries, getting beyond the physical, you've got all these libraries in these neighborhoods, which is amazing, right? An amazing asset to deliver services or to meet the needs or to signal new investment in a neighborhood, all sorts of things. But, how do you break up the silos, so that the money that is currently thought about as education money, I'm picking on education, health money, take your pick, ends up, in a library as a delivery system, right? A delivery mechanism.
That's a great question. I mean, one other example is senior centers.
Great
Libraries,
example.
particularly in the mornings before school kids get out of school, you go to any branch library and they're filled with seniors,
Right.
and they're taking Facebook for seniors, or they're
You need to
just
stop
meeting.
mentioning Facebook for seniors. But go ahead. Or we can debate what a senior is, but keep going.
I think you're right. I mean, that is a source of funding. One of the real kind of areas of progress is that the libraries have partnered with the city's Workforce One centers in recent years. What's great about libraries is they are those places that people trust and that people go to. Community-based organizations often don't have a place for people to go to, for classes, for deliver that. Or some people like immigrants may not trust going to organizations they don't know, but the libraries can harness that. So I think that they do need to take a look at kind of what are those existing funding streams. The schools have huge amounts of budget, even though clearly they're underfunded to some extent as well. But the partnerships between schools, so many public schools have cut their librarians. Public libraries are often very close by and have librarians, so there could be much more of a match made, but we've only begun to think about this. And also the other big question is just the hours. The libraries are barely open 40 hours a week right now, and a lot of people that could really benefit from these services, they're working. And when they get home from work, the libraries are closed. The city of Columbus has done some interesting things where they're sending libraries as part of some kind of a literacy initiative into laundromats, into homeless shelters, and they're kind of extending the library beyond the library walls, and we might want to think about that as well.
And the Finns allow their citizens a key to the library after hours. I'm not sure that would work out in our city, but it is an interesting idea. Tim, you manage one of the great symbolic assets of New York, Times Square. And it's in so many ways contested space. It's always in a state of reinvention. But you've said you don't have the tools you think you need to curate this dynamic space and manage it. That's the situation I think a lot of leaders of civic assets face. And so how are you addressing the challenge?
So I'll talk about Times Square, but I think these are things that are very relevant for many public spaces, and particularly this new category of public space. Because what happened a few years ago was this extraordinary thing that an agency, basically a 19th century agency that was only about managing a huge category of public space for vehicles and moving them around, said, we're going to make these spaces for pedestrians and make these streets and sidewalks civic assets. And so that space was created. If you go a couple blocks from here, and I encourage you to walk, you'll see the beginnings of a construction project that will effectively be done by next summer in terms of the access of the plazas. So we've got this great space, but the challenge is, how do we manage it, and what do we see what happens here? We've seen cases where a public space gets built, like the Pops, and then there's not thought about how it's managed and what the rules are and how to curate it in a sense. And so we have a choice. And there's been a lot of conversations about what's happening in Times Square. And as we say, this is Times Square. It should be a town square. There should be commercial activity. And quirky is fine, but creepy is not. And so the question is, how do we let this be this wonderful democratic space? But how do we manage it? And part of the problem is literally a legal problem where these spaces are designated as streets, and they're not really like parks where there's a whole regulatory system for managing them. But it's more than just about a set of rules. It's also about the partnership arrangements for how these are managed. And there's a partnership arrangement that has been set up for all of the bids that are co-managing these spaces. It still needs to get to the next level. And what we're saying is that there has to be a conversation, not just for Times Square, but for these new categories of civic spaces, where we're not just saying, what do we not want, but what is it how do we see these spaces being used as an asset for the community? And we're gonna hand out something right now, a survey, which please fill out afterwards, but we definitely want to get them afterwards, which asks a series of questions that help, and we did this with the Design Trust and Claire Weiss, that help us imagine what kind of space do we want this public space to be. You know, Jane Jacobs said about parks, it's not automatically, inherently good or bad. It's the extent to which that public space reflects the assets and the authenticity of the community around it, and how do you make that happen? So we asked people, not only what is your nightmare scenario for Times Square, but what's your fantasy for Times Square? What, 10 years from now, do you hope Times Square will still be what? And that gets to the question of how do you make sure that this place captures the authenticity and the assets of the local place? What specific things, what's our vision for this space? And then now is the time. We've had this radical change, a new paradigm for a new category of public space. Now is the time for a conversation about A, what's our vision? B, how do we set up the partnerships that are flexible enough to work for a Times Square Alliance, but also for a very resource-deprived neighborhood group? And then how do we have government approach a set of rules and regulations that empowers communities, allows them to express their needs, and create something great for the city?
And as representing a foundation who cares a lot about engagement, I love the questions that you're circulating. I think it's a wonderful way to ask the right questions of citizens about public space. I applaud you for that, and I can't wait to see what you've learned. You're going to feed it back to us, right?
Yes. And a little bit later, I have some beginnings of some feedback that we've gotten from some other exercises.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, you've each one talked about partnerships, right? And so I'm curious, and partnerships are talked about all the time. I think a lot of times horribly unrealistically. I mean, if you're running a bid in a successful commercial district, great, it throws off money. If you're trying to do the same thing in a struggling district, where's the extra increment? It's great when you can do, housing, and that housing funds your park, but what about when that's not available? So I'm curious, in your experience, do you have some principles, general principles that you think can help direct our thinking about partnerships and what works?
Well, for us in Brooklyn, one of my fundamental thoughts about partnership was it should be people who really care about Brooklyn and understand the waterfront just as much as we did. So when we we were blessed to start with a great friends group who's really been growing, and they've started the core of our educational programming and a lot of our athletic and family programming. But then we also looked to others who really cared just as deeply as our friends group. So the Brooklyn Historical Society, we started working with them on what it meant to interpret the waterfront experience and the history that came before us. We started with a small project, which is a signage project and a small piece on our website. But we're growing that into a place where they'll actually have a bricks and mortar location in one of our historic buildings to really address a deeper layer of what happened on the Brooklyn waterfront. So that's a partner that made total sense to us because they had the idea that they could grow with our location and present something they weren't doing up on Pierpont Street. The same with some of our programs. We have a couple of other bricks and mortar partners, the Brooklyn Children's Museum, St. Anne's Warehouse, but other partners that are more programmatic, like the Public Art Fund or Jazzmobile or City Parks Foundation. Or also, the same idea is, can they bring something that's very, very high quality that we aren't going to do or we don't have the inclination to do, but they can grow with as our park gets bigger. So it's been a very careful dance, but also very, very serious.
Jonathan or Tim?
And fun.
Well, I think it has to be a two-way street that has to start with kind of what Tim's doing and going out and asking, what can we do? What do you want from us? I think a lot of times people go out in communities because they have a big project and they just need to get community support, and they want to do the cross off the 2 or 3 things on the box, the 2 or 3 boxes, but I think you need to do more than that. When we interviewed folks at the Philadelphia Library, they wanted to partner with musicians in Philadelphia, and they thought they had the perfect project. But when they went out and actually interviewed dozens of musicians in Philadelphia, they found out that what they had thought was actually not what the musicians wanted. And they ended up really kind of tailoring their project to the real needs of the community. And I think that's not done enough here. And I think for libraries, for instance, I think that they already really serve the community so well, but often they don't have the chance to go out and really find out what more can we be doing, what are the programs that your community really needs. I think, for instance, we haven't seen as much of a take-up in the libraries nearest public housing. And again, libraries are at record attendance levels citywide right now, but I think that there's more that could be done to partner with folks in public housing and tenant leaders in public housing and really understand how can we get more of you to libraries and to take advantage of our programs. I think also when it comes to immigrant communities for a city like New York, it really involves really drilling deep down into the communities and to really maybe more than just the kind of big organization, but really finding out who are those kind of block leaders or the folks in the community that are most trusted by the business owners and the residents of that neighborhood. Too often those folks aren't talked to by major organizations or institutions.
I think the first question you have to ask is, what do you want to achieve with this asset? Not what does the party want to get out of it, because I started a program, Partnerships for Parks, that provides a model for that. And it started with a volunteer program where Parks was just looking for free labor. That's not talking about like what can the park do for the community. Second, there's got to be a notion of flexibility, that what works for the Times Square Alliance is not going to work for the Bed-Stuy bid. And there's got to be a real flexibility in the partnership that allows it to change. And we need to get the lawyers out of the room and have people who are saying, yes, this is a vision I want to achieve, how do we get there? Rather than a bunch of people saying, no, 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 where it's a relationship of suspicion. And the third thing is that in places where there aren't a lot of resources, in places
Was that for getting the lawyers out
yes,
of the
I
room?
think so.
I don't know what that was.
It's not always an applause line, but sometimes. But the third thing is, in places where there aren't adequate resources, government has to put the resources in. This Plaza program was started, and there's not funding for the maintenance and programming. And for Times Square, we're getting commercial activity, but that's not going to work everywhere. And that's an important thing too. And I think there's also a model with like the Brownsville partnership, which is talked about at this MAS session, which is about thinking of the place as the client and recognizing that just like you would if you're trying to help a homeless person, which it comes from the common ground model, where you're figuring out what are the specific needs of that person and how do you deal with them and support them.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to Alberto's comments real quickly and just ask if each of you or anyone who has a comment, we've been talking about physical assets, right? These physical civic assets, but obviously the overlay of digital makes them so much more powerful, so much more connected. I'm curious if you've seen examples or if you are imagining things that you want to do next in your with your assets in terms of that digital layer and the acceleration of toward the goals and the services that you're trying to provide. Tim?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing is just 11:57 every night we have an art project, Midnight Moment, on all the screens. That's one digital thing. But fundamentally, what I was talking about is a kind of community organizing principle, which is how to connect different people. And these digital tools allow for far greater levels of connectedness, which is about creating social capital. So it's a digital extension of that physical community organizing tool of tapping into and connecting different assets, where I think there's tremendous potential.
Are you running this survey, this conversation that you've just passed out on paper digitally?
We are going to do that. This is the first time we've handed it out to a large public group. And just where this heads is things of a vision where, just examples, be current and changing, but don't lose what connects us with our past. It's okay to be commercial, but not if it overwhelms civic activity. It should welcome the visitor, but make sure the local feel it's theirs. Those are principles that it should apply to every public space conversation and philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's great about libraries is they really are solving the digital divide, and a lot of people can check out books from their homes right now. The problem is that a lot of lower income people don't have computers or don't have a broadband connection at home to take advantage of that. Libraries are lending out laptops at branches across the city right now, but then one of the problems is that so many of the branches don't have enough electrical outlets. So it kind of comes back to this kind of physical infrastructure problem.
Right.
We're using the social media to get the word out, make sure people know how to get to the park so they can get around the park. People come and charge their phones at the park. That, to me, makes me laugh. I still want a public place where you can put your phone away and put your iPad away and enjoy where you're at too. So I think for a park, sometimes there's a come see and a come saw on the media. Still want to relax without my phone.
Not a bad thing. Okay, we've got only a minute and a half left, so I want to be mindful of time and finish up with a question to each of you. If you were writing a manifesto for New York's Civic Commons, what the city needs to fix, what it needs to get right, what the ambition ought to be, and what's standing in the way of achieving that, what would your manifesto include? One thing. One thing.
Connectivity on the waterfront.
Connectivity on the waterfront, meaning the physical connectivity along the waterfront?
Our residents want it, our tourists clearly want it, and it's something that's just going to grow and grow, and I think we're starting to see it in Brooklyn and Queens, but we should see more of it.
Great. Jonathan?
Access. I think too many of the kind of civic commons that we have just aren't accessible to as many people as possible, so there has to be better reach out and really have to make things accessible to a wide audience.
Tim? Last
Arts in the most broad sense of the word. It was very interesting, the preliminary start of this. 58% of the people, more than any other thing, they said they want to see more arts and cultural programming, but broadly defined as the creative spirit of the community being expressed in these public spaces.
Help me thank our panel.